As a good Mormon, Dorie Olds always believed that one of the secrets to a good marriage was a shared faith.
It is important to marry within the church. It's not just till death do you part. It's for time and all eternity.
Dorie's marriage to Mormon scholar Mark Hofmann was built to last forever, or so she thought. But when two members of the LDS Church were murdered, the golden boy of Mormon history became public enemy number one.
Immediately, the police began to believe that he was the bomber.
I didn't believe it. It's like, no, that isn't the person that I know.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. As a Mormon growing up in Salt Lake City, Utah, Dorie Olds was taught that family is everything.
It is very family-oriented. We had family prayer in the mornings. We had scripture time that we would read. We went to church every Sunday.
We're always encouraged to marry members of the church who have our same values and the same goals.
It's not just till death do you part. It's for time and all eternity.
In the fall of 1978, Dorie headed off to college and soon found herself falling for brilliant pre-med student and fellow Mormon, Mark Hofmann.
I just found myself kind of fascinated with some of his ideas and some of his experiences. He was very smart.
She called me one time and just mentioned that she had met a pre-med student up there and they were getting kind of serious. And then I think the next phone call was they were engaged.
A year after they met, in September of 1979, the couple was married in a traditional Mormon ceremony.
They were a cute couple. They seemed well suited to each other.
I just was standing in the gazebo and he came up and he just gave me this big hug. And I remember just thinking, wow, I'm gonna have a good life. You know, this is gonna be good.
After the wedding, Mark continued with his pre-med studies, but soon he decided that he would rather pursue another line of work. His lifelong passion for collecting historical artifacts.
I believe you need to enjoy your work and do something that you're good at. So I was happy for him because there was a passion there for him that I could see.
Just a few months later, Dorie and Mark knew that changing careers had been the right thing to do.
He said, hey, I want you to look at this book. And so I sat down on our couch and I started looking through the book. And it wasn't but a few minutes, and I said, hey, there's something in this book. And he took the book from there.
Gummed within the pages was what appeared to be a very old document, signed by none other than Joseph Smith, the man who founded Mormonism.
The document was called an Anton letter. When Joseph Smith was translating the Book of Mormon, he wrote down some of the symbols that were in the Book of Mormon that he was translating from and gave it to Professor Anton. The story with the Anton letter is something that you are taught and know growing up. And so discovering the letter was a big deal. It was like front page story, first page, first thing on the news. It was a big story.
Experts verified Mark's significant document. And soon the Mormon community was abuzz with news of his remarkable discovery.
There was a big sense of excitement, and he sort of got vaulted into fame all of a sudden. Everybody knew his name.
It appears to be the earliest Mormon document, so I think it's exciting.
So did the Mormon Church. They purchased the Anton letter from Mark Hofmann for $20,000. And before long, more documents and more money started rolling in.
The young Mark Hofmann was a rock star. He ingratiated himself in with the very powers that be of the LDS Church and some of the wealthiest adherents and collectors and dealers in all of the Mormon culture and world.
The next next 4 years were good to Mark and Dorie. Dorie took care of their 4 young children while Mark's career continued to soar. But in the fall of 1985, their marriage would take a shocking turn. It all started on October 15th, when tragedy struck Salt Lake City. 2 well-known members of the Mormon Church were murdered in a most unusual manner.
I was in my office with another attorney, and we heard some commotion in the hallway, and some of the attorneys walking by said, "Oh, did you hear? There had been a bombing at the Judge Building."
2 bombs had been disguised as ordinary packages. One had been delivered to the Judge Building downtown, the other to a local residence. A bomber was on the loose in Salt Lake City, and police had no idea who was behind the attacks.
There was a lot of fear, and there were a lot of theories thrown out there of who it could be. And Mark called me, and he was concerned about the bombs and concerned about who might be targeted. And he asked me to leave the house. That's when I started being more afraid.
Then a 3rd bomb exploded, and Dorie's life would change forever.
No one suspected that there was a person among us that would conceive of just cold-bloodedly murdering people.
In the fall of 1982, 3 years before a mysterious bomber began to attack the Mormon community, Dorie and Mark were basking in the glow of his blossoming career researching historical documents.
When Mark made the first discovery, it put him on the fast track.
I feel that Mark was very well respected in the community. People seem to really admire his ability to find these documents and this information that people have been looking for a long time.
Over the next 3 years, Mark made a series of startling discoveries in rare bookstores and thrift shops across the country. He uncovered documents penned by Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Boone, Betsy Ross, and even a lost poem by Emily Dickinson.
Well, this young Mark Hofmann comes from nowhere into the antiquarian book and manuscript field, and all of a sudden, this kid is making astonishing discoveries.
Ken Sanders, a Salt Lake City bookstore owner, met Mark Hofmann in the late 1970s.
Almost any one of his finds was so extraordinary, unique, and unusual that to those of us in the trade, it would be literally the find of a lifetime or a career. He was a wizard among men.
In January of 1984, Mark made his biggest find yet, a rare Mormon document called the Salamander letter.
The Salamander letter, if authentic, would tend to discredit the divine origins of the LDS Church and lead to suspect circumstances and, treasure hunting scams and frauds as the source of the church rather than divine inspiration.
The potentially damaging letter was quickly scooped up by successful Mormon businessman Steve Christensen. He purchased it for $40,000 and kept it out of the public eye. For Mark and his family, the letter meant yet another payday.
They were all excited about hoping to get a new home and a really nice home and everything, and I was just so excited for her.
But Mark's dedication meant less time for his family. He preferred to work alone.
He would tell me things like, I need to go do some reading, or I need to be in the basement for a while and take phone calls. I don't want to be disturbed. And I would do it, of course. A good wife, would always take care of that, right?
Deep down, Dorie knew Mark needed to work hard. He was spending more money than he was bringing in.
The process of being self-employed is called feast or famine. And my job was trying to keep things so that things were getting paid on a timely basis. And he had his focus on buying and selling and not on the day-to-day living kinds of things. It was very challenging.
In the spring of 1985, Dorie's husband Mark seemed more distant and stressed than ever before. But Dorie knew there was a good reason. Mark was preparing for the sale of a potentially explosive new find, the infamous McLellin collection.
William McLellin was one of the earliest converts to the church in the very early days, and then he fell away from the church, and then because he had left the church, one supposition was he'd taken a lot of damaging critical documents with him. So any of those journals, letters, documents, and whatever else he might have could be incredibly faith-damaging to the LDS Church.
Once again, Mormon businessman Steve Christensen, the man who had purchased the Salamander letter, was prepared to step in and buy the documents. This time, however, Christensen wanted the collection authenticated before finalizing the deal.
On the 15th of October, Mark Hofmann was supposed to deliver the McLellin collection to Steve Christensen, who would have a lawyer there to make sure it was an authentic collection of documents.
But Steve Christensen never had a chance to review it. He received a mysterious and deadly package instead.
On the morning of the 15th, a bomb had gone off over at the Judge Building. It was a homemade bomb, and it killed Steve Christensen.
And that was just the beginning.
Later on, out in the county, another similar bomb went off at the residence of Gary Sheets. And apparently his wife, Kathleen Sheets, had picked up that bomb, and it went off and killed her.
2 homemade bombs, disguised as harmless packages, had murdered 2 prominent members of the Mormon community. Salt Lake City went into a panic.
Mark called me, and he was concerned about the bombs and concerned about who might be targeted. Then he asked me to leave the house, and so I fled.
But Dorie's world was about to collide with the bomber in the most shocking way.
I couldn't stop shaking. I was just shaking all over from head to toe.
On the morning of October 16th, 1985, Dorie Olds awoke to a different city. A pair of bombings had rocked Salt Lake City and left 2 people dead.
Steve Christensen and then Kathy Sheets, they were associates in Mark's circle. I remember just wondering what was going on, wondering what was happening and who could be doing this.
No one had the foggiest idea what was going on. This is Salt Lake City, Utah. We're more known for, green Jell-O with miniature marshmallows and our per capita ice cream consumption, not for bombs.
Dorie's world began to crumble when the phone rang.
Mark called me in the afternoon, and he told me that he was concerned because of who was involved. He said, I think you need to leave the house. I think you need to go. That's when I started being more afraid.
Just hours later, Dorie learned that Mark's instincts were tragically on target.
My parents got a phone call saying that Mark had been hurt, that there'd been another bombing, that he was in the hospital, and that I needed to go down. And so I started immediately shaking, like, oh no, no, no.
A 3rd bomb had exploded, this one in Mark's car, leaving him clinging to life.
Hofmann was taken to the hospital, and he was seriously injured at that time. And the police, of course, came to investigate the case because it's another bombing. Of course, it looked like they would be connected.
Dorie's only concern was the welfare of her husband.
When I got there, I just held his hand for a minute, and then they took him into the surgery.
Meanwhile, out in the waiting room, speculation was flying.
I just thought, oh, this is getting too weird. Someone's going after him, too. What has he done?
Mark pulled through surgery and was coherent enough to answer some questions asked by investigators.
I thought at that point, okay, this is all gonna go away. They're gonna find out the right person. Everything's gonna be fine.
But Mark's account of the incident didn't make sense with the information gathered from the scene. Mark claimed he was standing outside of his car when the bomb went off.
The police had called in a bombing expert. He came to the conclusion that the bomb would have exploded when Hofmann was inside the car and not outside the car, as he told the police.
For investigators, it was a discrepancy that cast suspicion on Mark Hofmann.
So immediately, the police began to believe that he was the suspect, that he was lying, that he was the bomber.
If police were correct, then Mark Hofmann was the bomber, injured by his own handiwork. But for Dorie, the accusation was absurd.
I didn't believe it. It's like, no, that isn't the person that I know. He wasn't a violent guy. He wasn't at all.
Making matters even more complex was the growing suspicion surrounding Mark's many findings.
The discoveries got more astonishing and lurid by the day or the week, and it's so obvious that no one human being can continue to find material like this, that there had to be something wrong. After that third bomb, he pointed the finger at himself.
Could it be true? Was Mark Hofmann really a con man who turned to murder to cover his crimes?
His pride and greed got to him, and he felt that he could get away with anything.
I think a lot of people really underestimated how smart he is.
On December 1st, 1985, Mark Hofmann was released from the hospital, still recovering from severe wounds received when a bomb went off in his car. But was he himself the mad bomber who had killed 2 members of the Mormon community? Dorie Olds was convinced her husband was innocent.
There's never a moment that I thought he had done this. I didn't think he was capable of it. That wasn't the person that I married, and I didn't believe it.
We had heard that he was a suspect, and it just totally took me by surprise. I went, oh, what? No way!
Investigators had begun to hone in on their primary suspect.
We had this room upstairs, and on the walls, we had all of these little things, little sheets of paper with some sort of information about Hofmann.
One by one, investigators began to connect the dots.
Well, we knew there was a connection between Steve Christensen and Mark Hofmann, which involved a Mormon historical document called the Salamander letter. And at the same time, we had a forensic document examiner who contacted us and said, you know, I'd seen some of these Hofmann documents, and I've always been a little suspicious. Why don't we look into them? We were able to have these document examiners compare the Hofmann documents to documents of historical value that he had nothing to do with. And at that point, we started to realize that there was forgeries.
Everything from the Anton transcript to the Salamander letter, and even the Emily Dickinson poem. Analysis soon revealed that all of them were forged by none other than Mark Hofmann.
Once we were able to show people that he was a forger, it was easy for people to start to say, if he's a forger, if he's a fraud, I can understand he's a murderer.
But Mark continued to proclaim his innocence on all charges, and Dorie stood by him. Then on January 23, 1987, less than 6 weeks before he went to trial, Mark Hofmann did an abrupt about-face.
He said, I'm pleading guilty. I'm doing the plea bargain because I'm protecting you and the kids.
For investigators, the pieces of the puzzle had finally come together. Facing financial ruin, Mark had concocted a scheme to make a quick sale of the long-lost McLellin collection. He knew it would be irresistible to any wealthy Mormon collector.
Well, it came a point in time when he realized that Steve Christensen was about to find out that he was a forger. And so he killed Steve so that he wouldn't be found out. And he put a bomb over at the Sheets house to deflect the police.
But it was only a matter of time before Mark's luck ran out.
What happened with so many con artists is that his pride and greed got to him. He made promises greater than what he had, and so he was in debt and he had to produce, and he overextended himself, and that's what got him in trouble.
Presented with the evidence, Dorie was forced to face the ugly truth about her husband.
I was shocked that he had killed 2 people. There's part of me that still wants to say, no, that isn't true, because that wasn't the person that I knew. But it is so.
And perhaps worst of all for Dorie was one of the motives behind his forgeries.
He wanted to embarrass the church, and he wanted to be known of what he did.
Mark Hofmann played it both ways. He was forging documents that kind of confirmed the validity of Joseph Smith's visions and the beginnings of the church, while at the same time he was creating documents like the Salamander letter that would have disproved the origins of the church. And he was playing the LDS collecting market off one another, and in their haste and eagerness to acquire these documents, folks weren't doing due diligence.
After pleading guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder, Mark Hofmann was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Dorie filed for divorce 18 months later.
It's my belief that Dorie Olds is perhaps Mark Hofmann's greatest victim.
Dorie has spent the past 22 years trying to figure out the man she married.
As I look back at the past, I think he did carefully choose me. Someone who he could manipulate. I think that's what happened.
Despite all she's been through, Dorie's faith remains intact.
I was really angry for a while at God, and now I'm grateful, saying thank you for walking with me through this process, because it has changed my life and it's changed me for the better. I like who I am now better than that person who was before.